The earliest memory I have from my childhood is hiding in a fish and chip shop. I can still remember the feeling of grease on the tips of my fingers and the sound of being unable to catch my own breath as I crouched and I waited for the fear to be over. I was 6 years old and my parents had recently separated. I was out that weekend with my dad on a visit when two men approached us and my dad told me to run and hide. For as long as I can remember, my dad suffered with alcoholism and drug addiction. When he was sober, he was the best dad that girl could ask for. Those memories are filled with swimming lessons, the time where I got my first pet hamster in a rusty cage, and the rise to school on the school bus. When he was drinking, it was a different story. Those memories are filled with the time where he stood me up on my 7th birthday, the time where he left me outside for so long that I caught sunstroke and I couldn't walk, and all of the times with the bruises, the black eyes, and the broken bones. One of the last clear memories I have of my dad was sat on a mattress in his flat watching MTV when Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody comes on. He turned to me and he said, "Are you going to miss me when I'm gone?" At the time, I didn't understand what he was talking about. I was too young. He died of liver failure when I was 12 years old. My mum, who's the most wonderful woman in the world, is the youngest of 14 children. Growing up, she would cut cardboard out of cereal packets to cover the holes in her shoes. She was allowed a bath no more than once a week where she'd share the water with her sister. And when she was 16, like her brothers and sisters before her, she was told that she had to leave school and get a job to make money. There was no lack of love in that household, just a lack of resource. Growing up for me was much the same. My formative years were spent on council estates, meeting strange people through my dad, and having police panic buttons fitted in the flat. My mum, who worked full-time, would spend her Friday evenings rummaging through big green bins to find things to sell at car boot sales the next day. My school was your classic local state comprehensive. In my year of 200 students, only 36% of us got a C or above in English and maths. We actually did so well that we made it onto the BBC list of the schools with the lowest GCSE results in 2012. And one year, a documentary maker sent this random bald guy in to do an experiment called the classroom experiment, where they tried out different theories on failing schools. You can probably imagine how that went down in a state comprehensive. But despite my school shortcomings, I absolutely loved it there. We all had things in common: multiple part-time jobs, alcoholic parents, more things for us to worry about than just our exams. School for me was a home. The other thing that we had in common was that none of us had any appreciation how the financial situation we were born into would come to affect us in later life. Now, in the 10 years that I've spent trying to understand social mobility, there are two statistics that I've come across that have chilled me to the bone. The first is that a low-ability child from a high-income background is 35% more likely to become a high earner than a high-ability child from a low-income background. The second is that of the students who go to Russell Group universities, those from high-income backgrounds who get a 2-2, that's a lower second-class degree, are still more likely to enter a top profession than those from working-class backgrounds who achieve a first-class degree. Having told you what I told you about my school, you can probably appreciate that I was absolutely and categorically screwed. But I had big dreams, and I had big responsibilities, not just to myself, but to my family. I dreamed of becoming a lawyer, and so I got to work. And then, in 2014, something remarkable happened. In 2014, I walked into my school's hall on A-level results day, and I opened an envelope that changed my life forever. Awful picture. I became the first person in my school's history to achieve straight A stars at A-level, scoring the highest marks in every subject that I took, something that I did whilst working 2 part-time jobs at McDonald's and John Lewis. I couldn't believe that someone like me could get a golden ticket like that. And so I took that golden ticket and I went to the University of Bristol to study English literature. That's me on my first day, having registered. Slightly better picture, not too much. My first week at Bristol was pretty uneventful. Like every good fresher, I came armed with a toasty maker and a bottle of Glen's vodka. And on my first day, I left a tub of celebrations outside my door to try and make friends. By the end of the first week, after a lot of drinking, I'd caught freshers' flu so badly that one of my lungs wasn't inflating. So if you'd asked 18-year-old me how things were going, I would say pretty great. But then by the end of the first month, something seemed off. The first thing I noticed was that everyone seemed to know each other, which was weird to me, because university for me had always been about new beginnings, about starting afresh. And yet, there were loads of people who knew each other, and that was strange. The second thing that became funny to me was that my accent suddenly became amusing to other people. People would parrot things back to me. They would say, "Are you from Essex?" or "You sound common," which was strange to me, because that had never happened before. At a party, a guy approached me and my friend and told us that his jacket was worth more than our homes. In the 3 years at university, I was called a chav, white trash, and a peasant. And finally, the question that every state-educated individual dreads, but has to answer no less than 100 times in their first week at university. What school did you go to? I answered the question of what school did you go to no less than 100 times before I realized that there was a right answer and a wrong answer, and that there was no right answer for someone like me from a state comprehensive. I answered that question no less than 100 times before I realized that university came with a rule book that I had never been given. So let me ask you a question. What do you do when you've grown up dreaming of a better life, only to find that the life that you dreamed of comes with terms and conditions that not only did you not know about, but you were never prepared for? Do you give up? Do you just sack it all in and go back to the council estate? You can't. You've got to make it work. You have to figure out what it takes to fit in, to assimilate, to be like them. You have to figure out what it really takes to become socially mobile. And so that's what I did. I embarked on a project where I changed everything about myself. I changed my accent, stopped dropping my T's, because we know from research that not only is accent treated as an indicator of someone's social class, but those with accents typically associated with working class backgrounds are deemed to be less intelligent, less trustworthy, and less friendly than those with accents associated with middle class backgrounds. I got myself into debt. I took out expensive phones and laptops on finance, because in the sea of MacBooks in the lecture theatre, I genuinely convinced myself that I had brought the wrong equipment to university to study an English degree. I then did things that I'm ashamed to admit to you. I stopped trying to mix my two worlds. If my home friends would suggest coming up to university, I'd cringe in fear, scared of what might happen and what people might say. If my university friends asked to come and see my house, my council house, I'd make up excuses, because I couldn't bear the thought. If my mum would come to visit, the woman who'd spent her life protecting me, I would tell her how to act and how to dress. Because even though I could deal with being the girl from the council estate, I couldn't bear the thought of anyone making comments about my mum. And the thing that I'm most ashamed of is the way I'd act when I'd go home. I'd tell my mum all the things that I didn't like about our council house, from the trays that we ate our food on because we never had a dining table, to the shower curtain in the bathroom. I internalized my self-loathing so much that it became the thing that I projected onto others. So what did I do after I did everything right, after I became socially mobile and I finally fit in? Well, I had a massive, and some might say spectacular, breakdown, and I had to go to therapy. The thing that I spoke to my therapist about the most was loneliness. It was the feeling of losing touch with the people that had known me the longest, the people who on my 15th birthday had pooled the money that they made in their Saturday jobs to make sure that I had presents to unwrap. It was that feeling of going home during the university breaks and bumping into people that you'd known at school and feeling like, thank God I'm finally around people who know what it's like to be like me, but then realizing that in the time that you'd been gone, that you'd become a complete stranger. It was the feeling of being too common to be at university and too posh to be at home. In 2014, the year that I got those A stars, was the year that I became a poster child for social mobility. The Social Mobility Commission defines social mobility as the link between an individual's occupational income and the income or occupation of their parents. In short, what social mobility is really looking at are the differences between the way your parents grew up, the way you grew up, and the way that you live your life now. Where there is a strong link between the two, there are lower levels of social mobility. Where there is a weak link between the two, there are stronger levels of social mobility. What fascinates me about this is that success of social mobility, in the way that we understand it, is predicated on a degree of estrangement between the individual and the place from which they came. What's also interesting about this is that we know from research presented by Robert Waldinger in his preeminent TEDx talk on what makes a happy life, which is amazing, by the way, you should definitely watch it, that the happiest of people are not those who have wealth or status or fame, but actually the happiest of people are those individuals who have strong relationships with the people around them. We know from that research that individuals with strong relationships are 50% less likely to die prematurely than those with weak relationships. And yet, a successful picture of social mobility, as we understand it, is one in which the individual is separated from the place from which they came. It's alienation. It's hearing your own voice and not recognizing yourself. So, who am I today? 26 years in the making and a product of social mobility. Well, I'm the CEO and founder of an organization called the 93% Club, which is the UK's largest network of state-educated students. I am a graduate from the University of Bristol, a qualified lawyer, a Forbes 30 under 30 lister, and now, of course, a TEDx speaker. But I'm also the girl from the council estate. I'm the girl who watched her dad die young from substance abuse. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. More importantly, I'm the proud daughter of this woman right here. I'm someone that exists between two worlds. The young girl who grew up wanting a better life for herself, and the young woman who spends so much of her time regretting the things that she had to do to get there. We often idolize social mobility. We see it as the gold standard. If the concept existed in a vacuum, then I would tend to agree that social mobility is indeed a positive thing that we should be aiming for. But what I think we have so critically failed to do is really look at the how in social mobility. We have failed to look at the things that an individual needs to do outside of just getting good grades and getting a good job to become successful. We've agreed that social mobility is the right destination without really looking at the route. If I offered you a ticket to the Maldives but told you that you had to swim through shark-infested waters to get there, you'd probably say to me, Sophie, I think there's a better way. So why are we not applying this same logic to the golden tickets that bright, poor children get to a better life? Why are we not trying to make things easier for them? Maybe the answer to the question of how to become socially mobile isn't the narrative that we would want it to be. That actually, because of our preoccupation with social mobility being about individual change rather than systemic or institutional change, that social mobility is no longer just about getting good grades or a good job, but actually about tremendous personal sacrifice. It's about making decisions that come to be incredibly hard to live with in later life. So why don't we do something differently? Why don't we start asking the harder questions? Rather than asking how to make a few students socially mobile, why don't we ask whether it's right, both morally and economically, that in the UK, we segregate school children as young as 5 along generational wealth lines? We should be asking why, as a society, we have decided that someone's accent, just the sound that comes out of their mouth, is any indicator of their intelligence. We should be asking ourselves why 93% of the population, that's almost 100%, are educated at state school, but are grossly misunderrepresented in every top institution and every top university. We should be asking whether we've written the wrong rulebook for ourselves. When we answer those questions, I'd like us to come together and create a new blueprint for the UK. One in which the things we say matter more than the accents we say them in. Where our suitability for a role is determined by the brightness of the brains in our head rather than the brownness of the shoes on our feet. And where being educated at a state school, being part of the 93%, is no longer a source of shame, but a source of pride. Thank you.